Welcome to the Geekscape Book Club. Very excited to be here again for another fun-filled month of talking comics. I am Christian Bladt, joined by the one, the only Count Eric Connor himself. He's not actually a count; it's a social media, but he does know how to
Well,
count.
I'm in the process. We'll say,
Yeah,
within a couple of years, you're going to be talking
yeah.
very differently to me, Christian.
Well, we'll be talking about 20 issues of something, and I know you can get that far, and that's good enough. And so excited to have with us as well our pal Kaitlin Cornell. Kate, thank you for being here with us.
I love being here.
So we are talking about there are many different ways in which one can consume Sandman. I have this volume, which has a little Netflix sticker on it. This is but what we're focusing on is issues 1 through 20 of what is Sandman Volume 2, but it is the original Neil Gaiman run. So that's what we're focusing on. And in case this is your first interaction with the Geekscape Book Club, the premise is simple. It's an examination, an in-depth conversation about well-known, beloved comic runs and arcs that, for whatever reason, we have not read. And as I was reading this, I started to figure out why I hadn't read it, because these were originally published, I believe, beginning in 1989. And if I had read these when I was 13 and 14, actively buying many, many comic books, it would have, one, gone over my head a lot, and it would have been a lot of like, what the hell is this? So just as just as an angry teen, which I'm sure many in our audience can relate with, but reading it now as an adult, there is that feeling that I so often get when we do this, is oh man, how did I go so long without reading this? Because it's so incredibly well done. The stories are so varied. We're going to get into a lot of the different kinds of storytelling they do, but the inspiration for doing it was the Netflix series, which I was just telling Eric and Kate that I did watch a few episodes of. But as I was reading this for this show, I stopped watching it because there were too many times where I was like, oh, okay, I've seen this on TV, and I wanted to experience the stories unfolding for the first time. But Kate's got us covered. She's done both. Eric, have you watched much or all of Sandman on Netflix? I mean,
Zero. I
okay,
think what happened too, you had talked about us reading this around the time that I was thinking of watching it. And same thing, I was
yeah,
like, you know what, I really want to separate the two, and and then kind of give myself to also enjoy the experience of watching an adaptation of a property I know. So yeah, no, I'm gonna be diving into Sandman, I think, starting this week, the TV show.
yeah, and that was the interesting thing for me, Kate, was to actually start reading it. You realize what a great adaptation it was. There were a number of limitations that we'll get on, but specifically the episode in the diner, which really
Yeah.
stood out for a lot of reasons. And you're like, oh yeah, they just kind of took it, they put it up on the screen, definitely updated it in a number of ways.
Yeah.
But I so what did now? Had you read these any of these or part of these previously, Kate?
I did. I hadn't read them all at once because I would, oh, yeah, I should go back to Sandman, or I should, I love Neil Gaiman's writing. I'm a
Yeah.
huge Neil Gaiman fan, as in terms of his short stories in particular. I love his short stories. And everyone was like, you should read The Sandman, you should read The Sandman. But it was before I got into comic books when they were telling me that. And I was like, that feels like a lot. And I I definitely started the Sandman a couple of times. So the first section where the Sandman is captured, I'd read a couple different times, and then watching the show, having Charles Dance do it was like, okay, like they nailed the casting of all of those people, and they nailed the kind of like tone of it. But what was interesting about the show, as opposed to the comic, and reading it, kind of sitting down and reading it all at once, and like kind of going through the story without stopping in a way. I did take breaks. Um, was how I felt like I got more out of the Sandman as a character than, and I'm not saying that Tom Sturridge wasn't the right casting because he was, but I felt at some moments that like there were moments about the brutality of losing dreams in the first few issues that weren't quite portrayed on screen, that I was like, you know, like especially like you follow those four kids growing up with in the waking dreaming and the
Sure, yeah.
consequences of not having dreams. Whereas in the show, it's more in the diner episode where they go into the consequences of not having any dreams with just these people that you're watching kind of erode in front of you. But I reading that, that was what stuck out to me this time, where all of the details that weren't in the show that were like, oh, that's what made this and not more special or better. It was just different and interesting. So there
Yeah,
was room for
in the
a bit-
series, it's like a line of narration where they kind of
yeah,
explain, like, yeah, people stopped dreaming and, went into hospitals. They called it like the dream sickness, or I can't remember
or
what
the
they
one
called it.
that became homeless and then woke up
Yeah,
in the street and started crying. But then the woman
yeah,
who was assaulted and raped, and the first thing she says was, "My baby, I dreamt I had a baby," and you just see her crying.
yeah,
It's like, wow, like that was such a powerful moment. I'm tearing up right now. I had to put the book down for a second.
yeah.
And
I mean,
I'm
this
and
is
that show is like like the fact that they didn't do that in the show. I mean, I don't know. I think there were certain things that are like certain thematic themes or certain that the show didn't really want to go toward.
yeah.
Um and I felt like I got more of the Sandman as a character because I could be more in his head. I don't know who the protagonist was in the show.
Yeah, I think that there were, obviously there's only so much you can get up on the screen, but in terms of the specifically what you're talking about, Kate, it was impressive at how really heavy a lot of this was. And
Yeah.
the fact that this was a monthly comic book from a major publisher, it was under the Vertigo imprint. So it was like, yeah, this is for grown-ups. But still, I mean, the fact that DC put this out and what you would get from month to month, it's not it's not the way that like superhero comics tell stories where it's like, oh my God, I can't wait to see what happens next. You're like, right now, for our visual listeners, we have one of the stars of Sandman, a cat. So, but that's actually the issue I was going to recommend. So the cat realized that was just like, imagine picking this book up as individual issues, and you get the cat one, the what was it, the Night of a Thousand
Night
Cats,
of a Thousand Cats.
which is fascinating. And Kate, you let me know that they did do that as an episode of the series, and but it was like a bonus episode
Yeah.
that dropped after the initial batch. And it's just it's interesting, because it's very risky to do that, especially, to just be comfortable enough with your creator and the content that enough people will be back after you do an entire issue about cats. As you read through all of this, Eric, what were some of your thoughts, some of the things that stood out in terms of how varied the storytelling really was in these 20 issues?
Wait, you just brought up something that it's funny. I was thinking about a very similar thing when I was reading, especially the first few issues. That idea of like having a lot of faith in an audience and trust in an
Right.
audience that they'll keep coming back. Like, I mean, how many issues was the Sandman trapped? Was it two,
Probably
three? Like,
4.
I'm trying to remember exactly how long he was kind of in that whatever it
I
was,
got
the
it,
crystal
Christian.
bubble. Look at that. Who's faster on the draw? Uh, but even that alone, the idea of like taking its time with like having us kind of feel that sense of like eternity. That was something I really enjoyed in reading all this at once was the idea of like playing with time, like how long or slow something felt. There's even a image early on when one of his captors was like, I shouldn't have had to get so old. And it's just like him tearing up. And this is a guy who's not a likable character. It was 2 issues of him trapped.
2
Okay.
issues.
Yeah.
So right there, the
Imperfect
first 2
Host and
issues. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
Imperfect Host and I think Dream a Little Dream is what the episode was called.
Yeah.
Episode.
Okay.
The right. That's what
Ish.
those issues were. But finish your thought, Eric.
Yeah. So that idea of like the way time kind of was woven in. Like time is a character in this. Death is a character too, of course, but really helping us feel what it meant to kind of be in this world where time seemed like instantaneous and yet went on forever.
Yeah.
And I once heard, I think Reginald Hudlin, who's a filmmaker, producer, he was a producer on Django Unchained. He talked about like memory spans are, it's something about Hollywood. He's like, memory spans are not short, they're long. And
Yeah.
people remember things forever. And I was thinking about that quote a little bit when I was, his was a cautionary tale of be nice to people in Hollywood because
Yeah.
memory spans are long.
Yeah, sure.
But when I was reading this, I kept thinking about that, the idea of dreams, memories, like how sometimes your most mundane things enter your dreams and how hard it is to capture dreams. How rare is it that I see a film, a TV show, read a book that feels like a dream that we've actually had. And yet I thought Sandman throughout this, the way dreams were handled. I mean, they ran the gamut, of course. I was like, wow, that might be the neatest trick of all is storytelling wise, like to make me feel like I actually feel these dreams and they don't feel like just, with all due peace and love, Twin Peaks, maybe one of my favorite shows of all time. I've yet to have a dream with a dancing dwarf, try as I might. But
Still
these
time.
dreams,
Still plenty of time.
time.
hey, listen, I'm going to take a nap later today, maybe. I mean, we'll see. Maybe my saying it out loud will make it happen. But yeah, this was, I
Let us
can't
know.
believe I went 40 years without reading this. Well, I guess it wasn't around 40 years, but I went to this age.
No, but it's been around
read
for
it.
more than 30. So,
Yes, it has.
and you have to give credit to DC. I mean, Neil Gaiman is established because of this. Not that he hadn't worked before this, but to just be like, yeah, do whatever you want. Do with the concept of Sandman. The most interesting thing to me about the book is, of course, something that the show couldn't really be, and I was shocked at how much a part of the DC universe this was. The references to the Justice League, appearances of actual characters. Now, this book had John Constantine show up, which is obviously a very popular character in multiple iterations. Instead, in the series, they had a relative of his, played by Jenna Coleman, who fans of Doctor Who know well as Clara. And I believe she also played Queen Elizabeth for multiple seasons. So it was really the same story. They just had a different Constantine. But so because of that, obviously the Netflix show wasn't going to, involve the DC universe. But the amount of characters who showed up along the way, and one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that Eric got to issue 20 in here was the really self-contained story about Urania Blackwell, who was a character named Element Girl. Not a major DC character, but basically what happens to these characters that you don't see again when they get old and then can't die, but then want to. And I was like, no, they didn't turn over, Supergirl. But it was still like, yeah, go ahead and take one of our characters and have them want to die and have them die in the end, and really just sort of focus. It's an interesting thing, this idea about, immortals. We've seen it before with vampires and, other undead characters that just at a certain point, they don't want to live anymore. And sometimes they can't die. And then I thought it was interesting that, death actually, even though it wasn't Urania Blackwell's time, helped her. What did you think? Sort of now, was that something that they had on the TV show? Some variation on that story, Kate?
I honestly can't remember, and I just watched it. I was more obsessed with the cat episode, but I mean, from what I remember of the show, and after the diner episode, I do admit I bounced around. So, I don't remember.
No, it's okay. But even if they did, it wouldn't have been this DC character because,
No.
having an
What
offshoot
they
of the
did,
Constantine family is something they can do, but they weren't going to be able to put John Constantine in the show.
I will say that in the Constantine episode, there is a moment, and I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it.
Sure.
There is a moment in the John Constantine episode that was very emotionally powerful that involved letting someone go.
Yeah.
And the idea of, dreaming to keep people alive in a way.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. And also a story equally as well told in the comic book version, the
Yes.
one with actual John Constantine, as opposed to, I actually don't remember which member of the Constantine family Clara, her name's not Clara, Jenna Coleman played. What did you think going through this, Eric? I had no expectation of this being even remotely part of the DC universe, so I was very surprised that there were appearances and references. In fact, I think one of your images dealt with this. What were your thoughts as you were reading and this came along for you?
Yeah, like Arkham shows up at one point too, and
they spend a lot of time in Arkham.
Yeah. And I thought that was great, and it found a way to sort of name check it without getting kind of tethered to it. So that idea that on the periphery of all this, you have Sandman, you have Dream, and I thought that it was smart. And you brought up Vertigo before. Was this like the first title in the Vertigo imprint? Like I'm trying to remember.
It's a good question. I know that
it was right around the launch of it.
Yeah.
So like even like a brief moment.
So yeah,
of Batman and Green Lantern.
needs his stone, which is a major plot point in the first few episodes of the television series. But what he's not going to be able to do is go look for the Justice League. But there it was. We didn't actually see them in the content of the stories, but via flashback, you see Batman and Green Lantern having gotten the stone at some point, so these items having actually, tying into past DC stories. I just thought it was really interesting. And, I'm not familiar with much in the way of DC history at all. So these are not stories that I knew, but I'm like, oh, that's really cool the way that it's woven in there,
And Neil Gaiman,
smart too.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
What were you going to say, Kate?
Neil Gaiman is inspired a lot by by Batman in particular. And there was a particular writer of Batman early on in like the 60s era when it started to change that he was really inspired by. And he actually has a few poems dedicated to Batman and to, the idea of Batman. So it didn't surprise me when he showed up because of how much Batman is a huge character in Neil Gaiman's artistic upbringing, and that writer in particular.
And I thought Constantine, especially that issue, was one of my very favorites. And
I agree.
And it didn't feel just like fan service, which would have been fan service before fan service was really a thing.
Was a thing. Did Neil Gaiman invent fan service?
Let's say he did.
But I mean, it's like he didn't use that opportunity to put in Batman. You know what I mean? He used John Constantine, obviously incredibly well-known character, but he's not, his face isn't on the building, at DC or Warner Brothers, so I think that it was impressive the way that they were able to weave in and out of some of these things. We've referenced it a few times, and I do want to focus on the unique nature, how maybe not always issue to issue, but story to story, you were getting things completely different. Let's talk about the cat issue and the cat episode, Kate. And if your feline friend wants to return, I just think it's such.
He's not.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere now.
He's being a cat.
He's dreaming. Yeah, he's turning his back on you, and he's embracing his dreams. Give us your thoughts on sort of both versions of all things feline in relation to the Sandman.
I mean, I think what the Sandman does really, really well, especially in later issues, because I feel like they are allowed to do more play. So, like the first, I think I'm going to say it, the first 12-ish, at least the first 10 kind of have a same visual tone. And then afterwards, they're allowed to like bring in like, other times and like they go back and they, it's like the playing house section is a little bit more like neon. And the cat episode is one of those episodes where it's issues, whatever we're calling them now.
It's all right.
I don't know. Where it's they switch visual tone very quickly, and it
Yeah.
fits and it works. So it's like it's not it's because the Sandman can be many different dreams or many different things, or people dream different things. They felt free to pick a visual medium and pick a storytelling medium that matched what they wanted to tell, because they thought it was interesting and fun, and not that it had to fit or not. And they did the same in the Netflix show when by making it animated. And they chose a voice cast that was ballin'. It was just so much
That's
fun.
the cat episode
The cat
is
episode
oh,
in the
that's great.
Netflix show is animated, and that is awesome. So they
Oh my
actually go
gosh.
back to, in a way, they kind of go back to the comic book of just like that's just moving now, but it's very like, you know, it's they kind of tipped a hat to where they came from, and then they also went like, but it's moving now, and we get to do other things. And then what I was also going to say is, I think DC, if they produce this as a show, I think Netflix was the right call to produce this show. Because I don't think DC would go as far into how weird it is now, and how like, this is a lot of different things. And Netflix is kind of like, cool, we're down to clown, let's go.
Yeah.
Even though it kind of, Netflix shows kind of tend to look the same, but every brand, every property has a brand. So like, but I feel like Netflix was willing to be like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a cat episode, and we're gonna go into a diner for an episode, and we're gonna like devolve humanity, and then we're gonna have John Constantine show up, or John Constantine. Cool, let's go. Whereas I don't,
Ye- Yeah, no, and I think that just being able to tell those kind of stories, and it is interesting. I think that some of the issues, I think the different visual style is because anybody who's read monthly comics, just sometimes you have a different artist because somebody couldn't
Yeah.
make a deadline somewhere along the way, and a couple of fill-ins come in and bring a different tone to it. But
Right.
what do you think about specifically, Eric, taking the time to tell the story about cats? And I know we're really focusing on it because, look,
It's important, you guys.
it's so much more entertaining than the film Cats, that I think it's important that we talk about this issue that featured cats.
Well, it's funny you bring up it's animated, because that was my biggest criticism of Cats the musical, the movie musical, is
Yeah.
that it should have been animated. Like
It should
I don't know
have.
if you guys, I don't know if you ever read Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim that got adapted into Secrets
Yeah.
of Nim.
Yeah.
Sure,
Like
yeah.
some stories just are not meant to be live action, and
No.
and the cat issue was fabulous. I apologize. I want, of all the times for Fezzik not to come in and join the
Yeah, no,
conversation,
and to start barking at the cat
yeah,
conversation.
it's like, of all times, he has his
That's so
one,
good.
like, and yet where is he? He's asleep, dreaming of chasing after
Cats.
any members of delivery service folk who come around here, or the poodle who, I don't know, they don't like each other. I don't know what happened between them. Long and short of it is, I think, like, yeah, this is a narrative that is so bold, and the fact that it is a bit serialized, a bit procedural, a bit anthology, a bit continuous, and it like issue to issue, it really kind of like the tune would change, the tone would change.
Yeah.
You felt like it was like movements of a symphony at times, into a rock opera, back into a symphony. Like I don't know if this is a really old reference. Apologies, but The Hitchhiker was this anthology on HBO.
On HBO, sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that one, it's funny because in some ways, like, I was reminded of that because Dream was like that.
He's
Sandman's like that.
hitchhiking.
He is,
He
right, and
kind
he's
of is,
jumping from
though.
story to story. Sometimes he gets
Yeah.
directly involved. Sometimes he stays back, like the Watcher. And I thought, like, that's a really cool thing. And you brought this up before, Kate, the idea of, by the nature of this idea, the story engine it's built means it could go anywhere. It can go into a cat's mind, and it doesn't feel weird. That's the great thing about the cat issue. I never sat there and went, oh, it's a freaking cat. Rather, I was like, no, I was into the characters of the cat. And that lovely payoff at the end, which is something we all
Yeah.
could relate to, anyone who's had a pet, is,
Yeah.
what are they dreaming of? And
Yeah.
pretty good stab. And so I think like that's what's really so smart about this
And I
is
feel
that
like
it
that's where it
enables.
came from.
Yeah. Wait,
No,
go
you're
ahead. I'm
right.
sorry.
No. I interrupted you. I was the
No, all
asshole.
good. No,
Um,
never.
Hey, we're all assholes. That's why we're
No,
here.
but
Nah, I
it
mean,
was like
Christian's
no,
an
but like
asshole.
I love like Eric gets me so excited to talk about story engines. Like I can't even like every
Engine
time. Oh,
away.
no, but it's that
Start
idea
your
of
engines.
like, but it's like I wonder if like Neil. I just picture that issue being like starting to be written, and it's like Neil Gaiman just like looked over. It's like, what are you dreaming about?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
He
And
was
like
he was
making it the
starting a
weird.
different story, and then he's looking at the
Yeah,
cat and being like, oh wait, hold on. This
it's like
is
that story is much more interesting because that's a mystery, and in a way, like dreams are mysteries of like what are they doing in their head? Like, what are they doing to comfort themselves? Or is it scary? Or is it terrifying? Or is it,
Right.
guilty? Like, is it a way to process emotions that you're not allowed to process in a way in this very fantastical, safe realm?
And how many
And I
times I've
think,
seen my dog run a little bit while he's dreaming,
or like
and
kick,
and
like the
and
like,
yeah, and he's like barking a little. He's like, and then and the funny part is, I when I'll sometimes I'm like, is this a dream? Is it a stroke? Is it a young dog? I don't think so, but sometimes I've gone over and I pet him, and he doesn't wake up with a shock. That's the weird thing. He'll just sort of look at me, and he'll kind of put his head back down and be calm. So almost as
yeah,
if like I rescued him, but he expected me to rescue him or something. Or it's
right.
just me
That he
feeling like
knew it wasn't
give
real
myself a
or
God
something.
complex. Right.
right. He's
Right.
like,
Like
no,
what
that's
did
the relationship. Yeah, I get in
yeah.
trouble. You save me. Everything's
Yeah.
fine. Which
And I,
And I'm gonna reward you by eating something valuable of yours, like a pen or an old Star Wars
your
figure.
Hulk Hogan action figure.
That guy,
Uh,
there's a reason he's on the top
there's a
shelf.
reason he's up high. Yeah. But in any case, I think, really spending the time and telling stories like that, having the freedom, to do it, it's great. I think one of the things that really stood out to me in terms of reading it in the context of when it came out, obviously, it's our society's fascination with serial killers is nothing new. It Netflix seems to have really cornered the market in the last couple of years, and a few very high profile properties. Reading the storyline about the interesting wordplay of the cereal convention, which was spelled like breakfast cereal, I was
yeah,
just like, this is such a like crazy idea. But then he also goes in and he comes up with backstories for all these serial killers that are not, like, oh, okay, yeah, this is based on this real serial killer. Oh, this guy seems just like Hannibal Lecter, who did exist by this point in a couple of novels. But
yep,
and just living in that world, that very uncomfortable dark world for a little while. And it's just sort of it's interesting because there's the exchange, the young girl, well, she's not that young, she's the young woman's name Rose, who ends up caught up, basically one of the guys breaks into her room, and she had Morpheus save her. But it's interesting because and as her companion references, who ended up being a place in the dreamscape, which I thought was sort of an interesting way to transpose what the character was from what we saw. The idea that he can help you, he is someone that he has a sense of right, there's some goodness to him, but it comes at a price, you know, and sort of revisiting it later, just the decision that it's like, well, there's a dream vortex, and then I'm going to kill you. I saved you this time, but you're going to see me again, and it's not going to be great, and in both the comic and in both the TV show, he does help either Constantine sort of with someone that's important to them. So there are moments where we can see.
right.
And what I'm sort of wondering is the relationship, the idea that there is a price to be paid. And in some cases, we don't see that. Like, we haven't, at least me, I still haven't read the payoff of the original 75 some odd issues. I wanted to ask you, Kate, your thoughts sort of on Dream as sort of this, yes, he's a god, essentially. He's the ruler of his realm, but it's not beneath him to stop what he sees as being wrong at times. What do
Right.
you think sort of about that very complex storytelling, of it's so far removed from good versus evil? Okay.
I think if you'll allow me, I'm going to start with a slight tangent because you brought up serial killers, and I promise it will lead back to your question in the end. But coming out of the 80s, we were getting a lot of slasher movies. And in the 70s and early 80s, that was when a lot of the kind of like serial killing was at its I mean, we're still getting but they were at their high point. That's when we got John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer and the Golden State Killer and all these things. And
Yeah, I mean,
there
Ted
was
Bundy was kind of the first,
the
like
first.
big, they of course had existed before then, even in the recent decades, but that was like the first time the media like latched on to
Latched
Yeah,
like,
when the
onto
press,
something.
when
yeah,
the press like fed off that
right,
basically.
exactly.
But also it affected the stories that we told. And I wasn't alive at this point, but what I noticed looking back at these stories and these times is it was a, you know, direct response to, this idea of Americana and American safety. Like, death is scary and don't go out at night. And, all like drugs are bad, sex is bad. Those are the things that in horror movies, these things lead to a slasher getting you and somebody killing you. Don't go out late at night. And then you get like the kind of like, oh my God, is someone following me type of story. And I think for me, it culminated, especially related to the Sandman, in Freddy Krueger's story, because
Yeah.
Freddy Krueger attacks you in your dreams. And so this idea that of Freddy Krueger as at its core, it's not don't go out, it's not don't have sex, it's not don't do drugs, it's not don't go on the wrong side of the tracks. It's don't dream because they're not going to come true. Which coming out of the 60s Americana and after the Great War, like these kind of like this ripple effect of how America was turning at the time. And it was don't dream was the thesis statement of Freddy Krueger. And I think what Neil Gaiman did coming out of that is he saw that and went, no, dreams are what keep us going. Like dreams are the thesis statement of being a human being. And so to not name Morpheus as a god, to not name him that and to call him one of the endless things of humanity that will never ever change, that are not good or bad. They are. Death is a part of the endless. Time is a part of the endless. Dreaming is a part of the endless. Desire is a part of the endless. These personifications of these tropes that for the entirety of the 80s and late 70s have been almost demonized by the storytelling that was happening of it's and his thesis statement is they just are these things and they can get involved or they can sit back or they can ignore you or they have their own ebb and flows of their own emotions because it's not necessarily binary, it just is. And so I think that is the thesis statement of the Sandman, and I hope that wrapped that up in
No,
a nice
no,
little
no,
bow.
that
But
does.
that's
I mean, there is the parallel of the idea of Freddy Krueger being, look, if you stay out of one town in Illinois, Michael Myers isn't going to get you. Up until he takes a ferry and goes to Manhattan, Jason Voorhees isn't going to get you unless you're at Camp Crystal Lake. But Freddy Krueger, it was like, yeah, if you fall asleep, he's going to find you. So,
and it
stay away.
and it was the
Every town has an Elm Street, as he said
yeah
in, I believe, the
Yeah,
second one.
you're
yeah he
right. Yeah,
does.
yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just also this idea of like in that particular horror story of the sins of the parents are visited on the children.
Yeah,
So it's
Yeah.
like it passes. Like it's not he's visiting horror on the people who wronged him, it's the kids. So it's like it's a very generational. Like if you look at I could talk about Freddy Krueger a lot, but like if you look at Freddy Krueger as a thesis statement for America of like we're passing things to our kids and not allowing them to dream of the future.
Yeah, I think that they are very different figures. I
Yeah.
mean, Freddy is really basically out there for his own vengeance.
Mhm.
But the Sandman, it's Morpheus is really this is just the being that he is, but he's lived long enough that he has a heart, I guess. And you said something interesting, Kate. The importance in when he goes down to hell, in both the episode of the television show and the issue of the comic book, the he's able to prevail because nothing is stronger than hope. Like you can try and keep hope down, but if it still burns, it's going to, you can't get any of these other negative feelings to take away from it. So he, I think, has that, that
Right.
at this point we don't quite know how long this being's been around, but thousands of years, or give or take.
Mhm.
So sort of back to the earlier point, Kate, I'm wondering your thoughts about Morpheus as
Oh,
the
no.
Sandman, in terms of, he's not a hero, but by no means is this character a villain. I mean, his sister, yeah, probably, but
Yeah.
him, I don't think he is.
No, and I think that we of all of the endless that we meet, and they did this in the show and they did this in the comic, he's kind of the one on the most of a mission.
Yeah,
Like he kind of is like, I of all of the ones, he's the one that's like, "Oh, I have a 9 to 5." Or 24 to 24. Like,
right.
he's like, "I'm working all the time," in terms of, like, making sure people have,
Yeah, he's
he
an
has a
on-call
job.
doctor.
He's
He's
an
an on-call
on-call
doctor. Yeah, an
dream
on-call doctor, and
doctor.
that beeper never stops going off.
Nope. And it's just like, and so what was funny about for me, like, the whole, like, when he's trapped episode, it's like, I gotta get back to work because, if I'm not working,
Yeah,
the whole world is going to crap. And so for me, I think it's because he's so mission oriented. And then he kind of gets in a way distracted by the fun of the adventure of getting his 3 objects back. And then when he gets them back, he's like, "Oh, I have to go back to work now.
yeah,
I have to like rebuild my castle."
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Which I do think
Go ahead.
Eric and Christian, I had a question for you. We actually see in the first episode of the show what the castle used to look like. It's one of the first images that you really
Yeah,
see. And then at the end of the episode, you see what it has become after he's returned after 70 odd years in prison. And I thought in the comic book, they didn't show you what it looked like before. And they
yeah,
just showed you
Yeah,
the
yeah.
kind of degradation and erosion. And you only see it when it appears in his hand in the third issue of like out of sand. It kind of comes up and you see what it used to be with Lucian. And I thought that the comic book was stronger to not show everything, to not have a bookend moment. And you just see how much of what had been lost based on the Morpheus's reaction alone, and you see more of what the consequences were based on, him dealing with his he's taking on his own failure. And I thought that was a more interesting choice than some of the choices they made in the show by allowing us to see too many things. And did you guys have any thoughts about that?
well, Eric, why don't I let you jump in first, and
Sure.
then I'll share my
Well, and
thoughts.
obviously I haven't watched the show yet, but one thing that was really, interesting about the narrative of the first few issues is like you start late. This is a classic like trope even in
Yeah.
sci-fi, is like science fiction oftentimes you kind like good science fiction, you oftentimes start in act 3 in a larger story. Think like Star Wars New Hope. Think Star Trek. Like in essence stuff's been going on a while and
Yeah,
Right.
we catch up to it late in the game. And so here like he's been sort of brought back, captured, so yeah, not really knowing his powers for quite a while. Like those first 2 issues, like I know of the Sandman. Even if I hadn't read this, I mean, Sandman's been kind of a pop icon figure for a few decades now. The show comes out, I saw the ads. Like in essence, like I had a sense of it, but reading the issues somewhat blind. Like what was great about it was not really knowing his powers for a bit, not really
Mm.
knowing his story. And I loved how he would have to try to put things back to normal, and how his like minions were off doing stuff because he wasn't around. How a guy
Right.
could
Each
call
other.
himself the Sandman by the
Yeah.
basis of the fact that no one was stopping him. And it gets into one of those themes I'm always fascinated about, and it deals with faith, but deals with the idea of nobody's watching us, then it's on us how we behave. And so the
Right.
idea is like Sandman is not a god, but by his not being there, people left to their own devices, well, their better angels did not prevail for certain. So no, I like that they kind of hold back on the reveals, because
Y-
we are then
y-
new to it and feeling the impact on him.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
think it's the conventions of the different medium of storytelling, but also the times. As we were talking, as you're realizing this story is so old that it predates Metallica's Enter Sandman. By a couple of years. So it's a very different sort of storytelling, and I think that a streaming episodic, like the metrics they look for are people continuing to watch, and do they watch the show? And comic books being sales based back in the day, it's a similar thing, but I feel like they were comfortable taking more risks. I think that how many the episodes there were like 10 episodes, and then they did 2 extras,
Yes.
yeah. So I think you had to get him out of his prison at the end of the first episode, whereas in the comic book you could spend a little bit more time. I think if they had tried to do like 6 issues where he's not getting out, I think people would really kind of be looking for something else. But I think that that's why they chose to kind of give us. I think you're right, though, Kate, that not showing us what it was at the beginning. I think it's more of a payoff when you actually get to see it. Then the case could be made that you don't ever get to see it until he actually maybe rebuilds it, but then that's
Right.
so far off. But I think that it is a really interesting character, and we see so many different sides of him. When there's the story that sort of the Shakespeare story is an offshoot of the guy that he meets up with every 100 years, the guy who can't
Yeah.
die. I thought that
Mhm.
was that's a great standalone story, and this sort of, it's not really an anthology series, but it sort of jumps around in a way, and that's why I think, Neil Gaiman is responsible for a couple of particularly memorable episodes of Doctor Who, which he grew up as a fan of, because what Eric was saying earlier, that is a show where a lot of times you're like, did I miss something? There's
Yeah.
what's going, who are these people? What are we in the middle of? And, oh, okay, it's just what this is. And I think that he appreciates that kind of storytelling of just like, yeah, we'll get to some of this other stuff before. This is just what's happening now. And, I think that there are some threads that go through here. But like you said, Kate, you kind of bounced around the series a little bit. You could do that with these issues if you knew where stories started and began.
Right.
If you picked up the trade paperbacks, not these massive 1 through 20, but some of the earlier editions that had only 7 or 10, you could read them in a different order and not feel lost, I don't think.
Right.
So I think they do play with time a little bit in that way. But it's I don't know.
But they do pay
Go
off
ahead.
things, though. I mean, that's one thing, though. Like,
Yeah.
some of the characters that you think might just be sort of passing references in an early issue come back up and have a significant arc in the later ones. And I think like that's a neat sleight of hand too, where it's like anything at any point could return. So in essence, it does give a little bit of extra heft to all the storylines when like the guy from 100 years ago can return his one sort of human friend.
That's
Oh.
right. And one of the, go ahead. This was one of the images that Eric shared with me for our visual audience.
Oh.
Irving, the
And then he gets yelled at. He's not supposed to be called Irving. Like they need a G or something, right? Wasn't
Yeah, every gargoyle has a G name.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Ah.
Exactly.
Well, I like that. I'm named after an Irving. So when I saw that,
funny.
Oh, okay.
yeah, my grandfather.
But to me,
was
that was a
Irving,
perfect
so.
example of side characters that
Oh, yeah.
we get to visit with. You know, it's a very, I was gonna say it's a very rich world. Obviously, there's multiple worlds and realms, but this world of storytelling that we reside in, whether we're reading Sandman or watching it, I mean, there are some truly, really interesting and different characters and situations that I don't know. I mean, it's so inventive. You know, reading a little bit about sort of the publication and behind the scenes stuff, that Neil Gaiman said as he went along, it got harder for him to write the stories. It took much longer, you know, so it got so that it would take him sometimes 6 weeks, which for a monthly book, that becomes problematic down the road when it takes you 6 weeks to write an issue.
Yeah.
So
But there's something about the end of that section that I feel like actually having no other characters involved in this and like the endless, and you want to go into like this, the Morpheus and stuff, but actually the end of that thing that you just posted is probably like the base of why the Sandman is so lasting. And it's this when he's talking to Goldie, which is he thinks of as Irving because he has to name it a G thing because his brother, you know, Kane is going to kill him. And it's this idea of like, and I'll read a section of it. It's a secret story. It's a story of two brothers, and they loved each other very much, and they were always nice to each other. And the elder brother would never hurt the younger brother, never. And they lived together in the same house, and they were very happy. I'm sorry. I wasn't. I'm not crying. I'm really not crying. It's only blood, little brother. It's only blood. And it's like the amount of writing of the hope of that. It's hope, but you know it's not true. And and it's like that's the heartbreaking thing about dreaming, and that's the heartbreaking thing about most of these stories is you're wishing for a different outcome that doesn't exist. And in a way, that's why dreams are so difficult, and that's why Morpheus is such a sad character, because at one point you have to wake up. And I think that's why Morpheus as a character, to tie it back into an earlier question, is so fascinating, because he's seen so many things that are true and aren't true, and both of them exist. So it's not even a binary of things that are real and not real, because it's like that was real. You were dreaming, and you were also like not in the real world, and it's like you're living in a place where anything is possible but nothing is real.
Yeah, and to the extent that you know, we get some, you know, there's
That's great.
truly varied visuals. Eric, for our audio audience, explain what we're looking at here for this. This is the representation of hell, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, and it was when Dream had the, I guess you call it the Battle of Wits. And this is
basically the rap battle.
Yeah, right. It's he went 8 Mile.
Yeah, he went 8 Mile.
8 Mile Under, I guess would be the title. And so like the idea of like occasionally too, like this thing would remind you it's a comic book, if that makes sense. Because like a lot of times when you read this thing is dense. There's a lot to it. I mean, it name checks Shakespeare left and right. Shakespeare even shows up as a character at one point. But then occasionally be like, oh yeah, there's ghouls and monsters and demons and whatnot. But they tend to be kind of on the periphery.
Right.
And even there, I love when they showed up during the performance of Midsummer Night's Dream, that like the audience is same crowd of demons and whatnot. And meanwhile, you have Shakespearean actors doing their thing, and they would look out and that's the audience. So yeah, no, I think like under lesser hands, it would feel goofy. Under lesser hands, the tone of that would destroy the tone of what else they're doing. But
yeah,
Neil Gaiman, man,
you don't do it carefully, it'll feel like early episodes of Quantum Leap when Scott Bakula teaches Michael Jackson how to do the moonwalk. And yes, that's a real thing that really happened.
As long as you didn't teach him anything else, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, the moonwalk came from a 1930s.
Well,
and James Brown used to do almost all that shit too.
Yeah, so, no, I know. But
Scott Bakula taught all of them.
when your time travel involves famous figures, it can, you got to be really careful, is what I'm getting at.
Unless you're
And
Blackadder, and then you can just do whatever you want.
well, yeah, no, exactly. That's absolutely.
I was by the way, I was going to name
Go ahead.
check. I don't know if this can come up. One of my favorite lines from the whole series was about
Okay.
Abel. Abel
I
Was that
love
one
that.
that was one that
for a
you
couple-
sent me, right?
Yeah, Abel had been dead for a
Yeah.
couple of hours now,
But he's starting
but
to
he was
feel better.
starting to feel better.
Yeah.
I think like some moments like that where you just have this beautiful wit that would kind of sneak in there and all of a sudden like hit you. So
That's
yeah, there
such
was
a
a
great
lot of great lines.
description of Neil Gaiman's writing as a whole.
Yeah.
For any audience that wants to get more into Neil Gaiman, I highly recommend some of his short stories. I know American Gods is a very lengthy. Some of the stuff that's turned into series are very lengthy things, but as a reader, like, start with some of his short stories. Start with Chivalry. Start with Click Clack the Rattle Bags. Like, start with some of the shorter offerings that Neil Gaiman does, because you'll get that beautiful wit that Eric is talking about so eloquently, and it's very realistic things and then you see the story start to twist, and you're watching the twist happen, as opposed to like, we're in a twisted world already. But it's like, you see, it's like it starts very normal. Like, Chivalry starts with a woman in a vintage and an antique store, basically, and she finds the Holy Grail, but she already knew what it was, and she
Right.
bought it for like 60 pence. And then she also bought like a rag magazine, and it was like, you see, and then like somebody comes to get the Holy Grail from her, but you see the story start to like a little bit, and he's allowed more so in these books especially, but also in his short stories. So I highly recommend Neil Gaiman.
Found another
short
line I
stories.
was a huge fan of, and I think I sent this to you as well, Christian. When we had
Yes.
oh God, the creepy guy at the diner. I just blanked out his name.
E-
But when what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
Oh, the usual, the end of the world, and
Yeah.
like the meaning of that, and that's the last. That's the last panel of the issue.
Yeah.
And like when he says that, and of course that leads to maybe one of the best issues of any comic I have ever read in my life, which
Right.
was The Diner.
The diner. Yeah.
I cannot wait to watch that episode, because it sounds like
You're gonna
they did it justice.
flip your lid.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Holy
that
crap.
was that was the decision to stop watching while I was reading, because seeing that, it was incredibly well done, and I don't think it took away from reading it, but I
No.
was just like, I feel like I'm gonna experience surprise in the way I want to if I continue reading the comics first. And yeah, I mean, I think that episode stands out, but then also that issue, when you're basically taking sort of the mundane, every person, the facts of their life, there's always something interesting there. You go far enough beneath the surface, I mean, there have definitely been stories that have been similar to that before. I mean, there's 22 short films about Springfield episode of The Simpsons, that was like about all the minor characters. That was far less gruesome than this, but it really sort of, in a very different way, it sheds a light on, like, there's a lot going on. No one is really what they seem, good or bad,
Right.
and yeah, it's some really in-depth, and I can't imagine how any of this would have connected with me as a teen, reading comics at the time. So I'm very glad that we had this occasion to read all of this, and
Thank you.
a lot of what we've read before I've wanted to continue reading, but I feel like after I finish the series, I'll be hard pressed to not read more, at least of this original run. There's a lot that follows that, I might not be as interested in, but I do kind of want to see some of these payoffs that might not even be represented
Right.
on the screen. And Eric, I'll be interested in chatting with you at some point once you've actually watched the series. So
I would
even though
too.
this show focuses this Geekscape Book Club, we'll be talking about different books, but maybe we'll revisit Sandman along the way. And I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Kate?
No, I want to talk to Eric too, because honestly, like, can I shout out Eric slightly? Eric is one
As
of
long as you shout me out as well, it's
I
fine.
will, but I love
in my wake.
well, like I always tell you that you kind of changed my life, Christian, but and put me
Aw.
on this
Yeah, but
path and like
my wife tells me that all the time, but she doesn't mean it in a favorable way at all. You trapped me here.
with 2 beautiful children.
No, basically she feels like Dream. She can only exist in this one little tiny circle for 80 years, and then at some point, she'll accidentally be able to get out.
Love
But
it.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say about Mr. Connell?
She'll
But your
wake
wife
up
is
not in
also a
Burbank.
lovely human. But it's so nice to talk. I would be so interested, having you not watching the show and watching the Sandman, and you're so articulate about screenwriting
Aw.
and storytelling in general, and I'm so interested in your thoughts on how this translated and what the show brought that the comic did not, and vice versa, and like how they did, because I was at the Comic-Con panel with
I
Neil
remember you,
Gaiman,
and you spoke
posted
to
a
him.
video,
and I got to ask him a question, and I was just like, I sent the video to Christian earlier, and I was just like, I actually don't remember what he said because I like blacked out for 30
Right.
seconds. Like I was like, I was like, oh, that's what's his answer.
I've done whole interviews with people that I'm so I'm like a little bit enamored by, that I'm like, I don't remember anything they said. I have to go back and watch it,
And what
But
he told me, Eric, and I think you might find this interesting. My question was along the lines of, what I told him he inspired me to be a screenwriter, and he found that really sweet. But then I also asked him, this was written 30 years ago, and what is the responsibility you feel as a creator to stick with what you wrote that made you popular, and what was what people love about the Sandman versus how you're growing as an artist and how we're growing in the times that we're living. And what he told me, I thought was I think you'd find very interesting, which was, it's more about trusting this young 28-year-old Neil Gaiman, that he knew what he was doing back then.
Right.
And it was like at the core, like, yes, they gender bended some of the characters, and they had to take out the Justice League, and they had to like do some like little switches, but it's like Lucifer was always androgynous to him. And it's like that, and you just have an androgynous casting, and that worked for him. Lucian, that the base of the character is what was played, even though it doesn't look the same. But I was amazing of just like us as writers and people who want to tell stories, people who talk about stories. It's like we have to trust what we're saying, even when we grow past it. And I thought that was fascinating. Also, the fact that he was 28 when he wrote this.
I know. Fuck that guy. Now I hate this.
Yeah, I know.
Now I hate every page of this.
Oh, I know.
There's like when you're younger, people like Neil Gaiman and Orson Welles, you're like, oh, good for them, they did it when they were young, and you're like, oh no.
And then you go past their age, like I'm 32,
when you get
and I'm just like, oh no.
I mean,
it's interesting.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Eric.
Well,
I was just going to say, Eric, you can relate to me that we got to an age where there are no professional athletes that are our age anymore. Within the last 10 years, it's still
one or two field goal kickers maybe get close to us.
Yeah, no, they're like Jamie Moyer was older than me at one point for baseball fans, and then once those guys retired, you're like, well, maybe there's a couple coaches my age,
I mean, and then they're considered out of touch with their young players.
Well, definitely. And but what was the relevant point you were going to make? Not that one.
Well, first of all, Kate was always too kind, and as I read this too, and I knew you were doing the book club, I'm like, yes, because it's like to do this book club without you would feel like we had cheated on you. Intellectually.
Well,
right?
every time we do a show without Kate, I feel like we're cheating on her. So,
I feel, I'm so sorry.
And so I was thinking about like what you just brought up. Okay, so I read Alan Moore, who Alan Moore seems maybe
he seems like a lot of fun.
Oh yeah,
a great guy to hang out with.
Oh, one of my favorite quotes from Saturday Night Live ever was Rosanna Dana, played by the wonderful Gilda Radner, and she reads a letter like, "Dear Rosanna,
from Mr. Richard Fader from Fort Lee, New Jersey." Yes.
First of all, I got this, I got eczema, and I got gas. First of all, you sound like a real attractive guy. That's what I was thinking about with Alan Moore. It's like, man, he sounds like a fucking party. That guy. And yet, I mean, obviously The Watchmen, one of these great pieces. the adaptation that was just done a couple of years ago, I thought was
For
one of the
HBO,
most,
you mean?
yeah,
Holy
Yeah.
moly.
so daring and bold and timely. And I watched that during COVID. It was really like
Yeah.
that summer 2020. And I was like, I cannot believe how relevant this is. And so on one hand, I understand it is a baby of yours that you want to protect, but the other time, like, my God, the people who made this show, and it was the guy who did Lost,
Damon Lindelof.
Damon Lindelof, right?
Yeah.
Clearly loved this property, but
Right.
clearly was like, how is this relevant to right now in a way that maybe the movie wasn't, or the animated, whatever they did, like the animated adaptation of the comic book with the
Right.
emotion. And I thought it was such a wonderful, bold, and they did something along the lines of what you just described. It's like they trusted the original story, but their choice was they trusted it enough that they went a very different direction with it. But I thought they kept the spirit of that, everything great about that series intact. Yeah, Alan Moore hated it, and he wanted nothing to do with it, no part of it.
Wow.
And it was kind of like almost like what you just described, but like almost like the dark side of it. Like Neil Gaiman
Yeah.
respecting what he did as 28, appreciating people trying to capture that, versus Alan Moore, who's just like, I don't know. I mean, feeling like, no one should ever touch this. It was perfect as is. Leave it alone.
Yeah,
And,
Yeah,
or,
but
or
I
hating The Shining when it came out.
oh
and
my
hating,
God, yeah, you're right.
you know,
Stephen King.
Stephen King hating.
Stephen King likes the TV version with Steven Weber in the Jack Nicholson role. Yeah, so
It should have been Tony Shalhoub. If you're going to do anyone from Wings, Tony Shalhoub's the clear winner of that derby.
I mean, look, you know, you could have also Sandman. I can't. Thomas Hayden Church.
Yes.
Different Sandman.
Callback.
But yeah, you know, that's true. But, hey, what if Thomas Hayden Church had played this Sandman, because he already played the Marvel Sandman, and they're just like, close enough.
Only if he played as his character from Sideways.
I think that right. I think that the difference is that Neil Gaiman was a producer and involved in the series.
Sure.
So I think that that's important when you get to do that, you know, and
Which
I
shows
think,
how respectful they were.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of these adaptations, Rings of Power is coming to mind, especially, of like not taking the original artist in consideration, of like to adapt something without, you don't, it's not that you need permission, but without their blessing, but without their, what made it special in the first place. And without that vision, I think is it's sad when that happens. But also, you know, Alan Moore probably wouldn't have approved of what The Watchmen did, and The Watchmen was probably better for it. And it's
right.
Yeah, I think that if you bring the creator on board after you've developed your vision, and then you're able to work together, I think that's fine. And when the creator stands in the way of what your vision is, that is where you get into a problem.
There's also something about the concept of the endless having an effect on this.
Yeah.
Of what Eric brought up of time is part of this, is that time grows and you learn and you adjust, and you know, it doesn't get stuck. So I don't think Neil Gaiman is that type of artist creating something that is timeless, or jumping in and out of different times, or jumping in and out of dreams, to have it be stuck as one thing when the characters grow with time. So I feel like that as a concept was a huge foundation point for the growth of the series.
Yeah. And, you know, as we're sort of talking, and it's so hard to tie up because there's so much more. There's a series to watch. I feel like of all the entries we've done in Geekscape Book Club, and we've only really done it for a few months, I think this is the one where I'd be the most inclined to do a sequel, to do volume 2. You know, it's not issues, it's not issues 21 through 40. It's there's some standalone stories that get inserted in there. So, but it's basically the same amount of content. So to kind of come back, having all watched every episode of the show, and then reading the next batch of stories, seeing how they both develop, I think that would be, you know, that'd be worth doing maybe sometime in 2023, because I do have plans for what we're going to do the next couple of months. Next month, November, for Geekscape Book Club, we'll do it somewhere right before Thanksgiving. to tie into the latest DC movie. The book that I have selected upon recommendations is Black Adam: The Dark Age, which is a very specific story that he's looking to do. And I saw the Black Adam movie, and what I'll say is like it's a superhero movie with The Rock. Somebody who walked in there wanted something different than what was in that movie. I don't know why, because I was like, oh, that was fun. And I'll just say, Dr. Fate is the best character in that movie.
Dr. Fate's the shit.
Great action figure back in the day.
Yeah, Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate. The usage of Dr. Fate is amazing. I might actually do a Dr. Fate entry in the book club at some point because of how much I liked him in this movie. Yeah, what were you going to say, Kate?
Well, I watched it last night, and the more I talked about it, the more I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
it might be usually like you talk yourself out of liking movies,
yeah.
And I was expecting to like, oh, it's a fun action movie with The Rock, and that's what I was expecting. But the more I talked about it, I have an entire dissertation on why this movie is better than people think it is. It is ridiculous. I am the worst.
I don't think it's bad, so you don't need to convince me. I think
I'm seeing it 4 o'clock. I'm seeing it 4 o'clock today.
Oh my god!
I think that look, I remember the first time I saw Reservoir Dogs
with the kids,
and somebody was like, "What'd you think?" And I was like, "I got to think about it." I think those are the best movies where you can't say for sure. Like, look, there's a movie that when I saw Rob Zombie's The Munsters, I knew right away that was garbage.
Right.
When I saw Don't Worry, Darling, I knew that wasn't good. When I saw Halloween Ends, I knew that wasn't good.
Oh, by the way, I saw that one.
Better than Halloween Kills, but that is saying absolutely nothing. But anyway, so Black Adam, I think that we can talk about that as a film when we talk about the book next month. And we've hopefully got big plans for December. Our book will be a Black Panther story, which we'll talk about next month. And hopefully there'll be a very unique way where people can interact with us while we do that episode. But we'll talk about that next month when things are all aligned. Well, thank you to both Eric and Kate, and to everyone who's enjoying this. Let us know if you're interested in more Sandman. I think we're doing it anyway. The cat is interested. The cat is dreaming about it now. What's the cat's name? I keep just calling it the cat.
His name is Link.
Link. Oh, that's right. I just forgot Link. But and any comments you have, you can always reach me on social media at Christian DMZ, or you can find the YouTube version of this show and leave comments there. To keep in touch with our other hosts, though, Kate, where can people find you, and what is something that you've worked on recently that people will be able to find very soon?
You can find me at Cornellable, CORNELLABLE, on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. I do not tweet, but I have one. And you can also find me at Geekscape, the Geekscape Network. We do the Final Frontier podcast, which will be coming up very soon, because you can also find me at Uncanny Film on Instagram and on Facebook. There is a short film about Rogue and Gambit, two iconic and lovely X-Men characters, that takes place after a 4-issue comic book run from 1995. And that should be coming out beginning of November.
So follow Uncanny Film for all the updates and behind the scenes info, the scoop. And Eric, where can people find you?
Well, I'm known as Unholy Eric, and you can find me at Count Eric Connor over on Twitter and Instagram. And the documentary I help produce, Other Voices, is now available on Amazon Prime for free with the low price of your Amazon Prime subscription. So if $5 scared you off from renting it, now you have fewer excuses.
It absolutely did. The $5 definitely scared me off. The problem is now I'm going to have to not do shows with you for a while, because every time you mention it, it's a reminder of like, I have no excuse for having not watched this. My excuse is going to be I'm finishing Sandman next, but then I will get to Other Voices.
But Sandman, you're finished now. So now it's Black Adam and
no. Sandman, I have to watch the TV series. So
I see. Okay.
That'll be my TV time.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Neil Gaiman today, October 23rd. I did reference that he wrote 2 episodes of Doctor Who, The Doctor's Wife and Nightmare in Silver. I promote those because today is for fans of that show. It's only really happened 12 times before, but it is a regeneration day where the next actor will be introduced to us, sort of, with David Tennant, I think, slipped in the middle as well. So we'll see how that all unfolds. But those are always very big days, so always a great time to revisit and some of Neil's other work. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. Please subscribe to my Blattcast YouTube channel, BLADTCAST, where you will find the show that I do very regularly with both of these delightful humans. And I'm sorry, Link, you have been on, but you have not weighed in on She-Hulk. Marvel Movie Talk, you can find it there, and the titular Blattcast podcast, all there. And please subscribe to this podcast through Geekscape and all the great Geekscape content. Thanks to Jonathan, who was aghast that I hadn't already read Sandman, but he does understand that that's the concept of the show, is that I know I should have read it already. And now I have. And so now he doesn't have to talk down to me in the same way. But congratulations to he and Heidi for getting
Mazel tov.
But we'll be back next month to talk Black Adam. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. I'll make sure to get that date out there. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next month.